Oh, no, no, no. Fuck you. You long-tittied, no-nippled, have-an-ass bitch. So, here's where I'm at. I don't know if you guys are even going to see any of this on the camera, but whatever. Point is, I was having a P0406 DTC, diagnostic trouble code, and that's for the EGR valve, right? And the problem is, possible causes: EGR position sensor signal short circuit shorted, blah blah blah, shorted, EGR position, blah blah blah, sensor ground circuit open, EGR solenoid assembly. I took that to mean the entire assembly with the EGR valve, the pipe, the gaskets, all of that stuff. I discovered I had a vacuum leak where the EGR tube meets the intake manifold. I made a video previously where I basically made a fix, which was the equivalent of like putting chewed gum on a leaking water pipe, okay? Because I just didn't have the time. And now, I made a video as I replaced the seal on the EGR valve. And this took me like 3 hours because this was the first time I was attempting this repair. Cleaned out all the carbon deposits, replaced the seal on the tube, and fired up, and I get the code again. So I'm going to say it's hopefully just the EGR valve in and of itself, and not the PCM, because that's what it's leaning towards, I think. So yeah, I have with me a spanking brand new, let me turn this off, maybe the lighting will be a little bit better. I have a spanking brand new EGR valve, exhaust gas recirculating valve. Yeah. I could knock a motherfucker out with this piece of shit. Wow, that's like sexily clean. So, new EGR assembly. What is this? What do you want me to do with this? Oh shit, you gave me gaskets too. Nice. So this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the EGR valve off of the exhaust manifold, and I'm pulling the tube out of the air intake manifold, or plenum, or whatever you want to call it. I'm going to twist this pipe and try to take it out from underneath the car, by the way. I'm doing this from underneath the car. And I'm going to replace the gasket that mounts onto the engine. I'm going to replace the gasket between the tube and the EGR. And the new silicone seal that I had on this tube going into the intake plenum, I'm going to reuse that because it's brand new. 2 days ago I did this thing and I replaced the seal. There's no more vacuum leak, but I'm still getting a code. So I'm going to switch out the EGR valve. Clean things up a little bit too while I'm at it. So without further ado, let's get to work. Squeeze my hand through here and you see this is the EGR valve. There's a bolt here, a bolt here. I'm going to undo these two bolts. The ones on the side connecting to the copper tube I'm going to do later. But these two bolts come off. I go to the top of the car and then I pull out the copper tube. So I'm doing this from under the car. These two bolts are 10mm bolts. So get on there, motherfucker. Please. Righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. This second bolt is the bigger pain in the ass because it's hidden from view, so you just have to feel your way around it. Also note that this is going a lot faster for me because this is the second time I am doing this. If you're doing this for the first time, probably going to take a lot more time than this. I just make it look easy at this point, I guess. So just keep that in mind. This. Take the old gasket away. Gently. And taking care not to lose the silicone gasket in there. There it is. Good baby. So we have disconnected the tube. The only thing holding the EGR in place now is the connector, which will now be easier to access. Now, but the thing is, I'm probably still gonna need both hands to undo this connector, but you see how it's free moving now, right? So let me disconnect this connector. This connector has a ridiculous pain in the dick, but there's a red tab, and you push this red tab out that way so that this like little nippled edge or ridgy edge or whatever comes out, and then you push on the top and you pull it out at the same time. This leaves us with a free-hanging EGR valve. So you rotate it counterclockwise 90 degrees, fit it between these two wires. There's a fat wire and a small wire, and then you pull it out and then you turn it back 90 degrees clockwise, and it's just easy peasy from here. So this is what has been giving me such a hard time. This is the EGR valve, and there doesn't look like there's any carbon buildup in there, but I don't trust this bitch at all. This is the copper tube. I've cleaned the copper buildup out from last time, and the seal that we will be reusing, by the way, so the seal stays. This side of the tube is clean. Okay, to undo these two bolts, I had to use a 10mm thing, but this looks like 8mm. I'll check that real quick. It is 8mm, so I'm going to undo these two things real quick. That's one. This one's out. It's going to be hard to see, but I took this inside and looked into it with a camera and flashlight using my cell phone. And there's some carbon buildup in there, and I guess it's the little pintle or piston looking thing in there is either open or closed, but it's not completely down that way. So I'm guessing this indeed was the problem the whole time. Now the other pain in the ass is going to be putting this back together, because it has to be done very evenly and gradually. And this process is made worse by the fact that I didn't want to take apart the entire intake plenum gaskets and all. So it's going to take a while. Getting this thing off was a bitch. Putting it back together is also going to be a bitch. So I'll try to show what I got going on with that too, but I might not be able to. So maybe just enough to give you guys a general idea. We'll see how that goes. See, this part isn't welded together. If it was, that would just be too easy. So the thing is, when I put the new EGR in, with the gasket and everything, I don't exactly know what the exact position on this is. So I can't just put this on and then put the entire EGR assembly back like I took it out. So I have to do it gradually, and I think I will start by install the EGR first, then put this copper pipe in. And since this thing isn't welded, I found it easier to just put the tube in first. Then I will put the EGR, screw it in tight, then I will work behind this somehow and get it real tight. while that is sitting inside. So let's get to it. So I put the tube in, I put the EGR in, I've set the bolts by hand. Now I'm going to go in and tighten them as tight as they'll go. One bolt, tight next. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put the two bolts and the gasket into the tube end and just hand tighten it to the EGR valve. Once I hand tighten it, I'll go up and I'll make sure it's flush with the intake plenum again, and then I'll go back down and I'll tighten it. So you'll notice that I have the gasket and the two bolts through, and then over here is the unplugged pipe. So I'm going to get up there, I'm going to plug that in gently so as to not lose this stuff, and then I'm going to hand tighten it to the EGR. So I'm sitting down here as if I'm giving my transmission some 69. One hand over here. Yeah, that looks pretty clean actually. Okay, so not going to get this crazy tight. I'm going to do the same thing for the other bolt. So you can either put the EGR valve with the tube inside and then try it that way, or you can put the EGR and the tube inside individually and you can try it that way. I did it individually. I'll tell you, either method is a huge pain in the ass, so pick your poison. So this connector has a fucking red tab. Okay, and what I did was this. Okay, so to that side, that's how you push out the tab, and then I pulled out the tab completely. I slid the connector in as far as it'll fucking go, and then I put the red tab in back inside, and now it locks. And EGR valve is on, seal is on, this is on. The pipe up there is this stupid ass hose thing. I say I'm not going to get it any more flush than that. This isn't exactly flush, but there doesn't seem to be any vacuum leaks coming from this. No vacuum leak here. No vacuum leak here. All seals look okay. Discounting the ramps and the garage and all that stuff, these are the tools that I have used. Have a ratchet or socket wrench or whatever you want to call this. The head swivels on this thing. We have a 10-inch extension. I think this is a 6-inch extension. Not necessary, but it makes life a little better. A 10mm socket. This is for the EGR valve. An 8mm socket. This is for the tube to the EGR valve. And this is just a conversion piece because I didn't have a small enough wrench, so I used a 3/4 to 1/4 converter piece. I think that's what it is. Something along those lines. This I used very briefly, but didn't really need it. This is just a little wrench. So this is everything I used for the video, but really what you need is this. It was definitely a difficult repair, but keep in mind that I did this without removing the intake manifold, or intake plenum, or whatever it is. The whole black part that sits on top of the engine. Because that's like 20 bolts and a gasket and this and that, and unplug this and unplug that and pull this hose and pull that hose and everything. So I just went in there and I changed the EGR valve from underneath the car. So, if you want to save time and money, most likely money, you could do this job yourself, you know. The seal and each gasket costs $2 or $3 if you go on Advanced Auto Parts website, and you also Google AutoZone, Advanced Auto Parts promo codes or whatever. You know, you get to your cart, you enter a promo code, and it takes like 25% off or something or whatever, depending what you find that day. And you can get like a bunch of gaskets and stuff for $2. All I really did was I bought the blue ring gasket for the tube seal for about $2.60, I think, and then I bought the EGR valve for $41 or something like that, because I applied the whole coupon code thingy. On the other hand, if you were to go to a dealership, they would charge you anywhere between $190 to $300. And then again, that's because they do it by the book, because the labor rates in that book are set, if I'm not mistaken, if that's how it's done. So, you know, they will charge you the price that it would take to, you know, take off all the bolts for the intake manifold, take off the intake manifold, unplug everything from the intake manifold, replace the gasket in the intake manifold, and then do all the EGR work and so on and so forth. And then put everything back together again. So, if you're a skilled mechanic, this is hands down the easiest way to do this. And if you're like me, who's, you know, not a professional mech, but not not going for the more expensive alternatives, then this is what you could do, and it works great. Thank you so much for watching, and have a good one. I went out and I got a EGR valve tube seal, which is a dumbass gaskety looking thing. So, I want to get to the concept of this EGR valve, for those of you looking for something a little educational. As you can see in this picture, it's something like can-shaped, okay? So let's just, I'm not an artist here, but suppose we have an intake manifold or intake plenum, right? This is, I know I'm drawing it boxy, but the point is we have the pipe that goes to what could be an air box or a cold air filter. Air enters here. Air, right? It goes down into the intake plenum, which is this black piece of plastic that I will point out in another clip. Then this thing sits on the engine, on top of the engine, with the pistons and the combustion chambers and so on and so forth. I can't draw for shit, but there's crap, right? Pistons, combustion chambers, so on and so forth. Air goes here, mixes with fuel, ignites, generates energy, and so on and so forth. And the exhaust comes out of the exhaust manifold into the exhaust pipes, which is out. This is, of course, an extremely crude way of looking at it. Now, the EGR valve is basically a can-shaped object that sits over here and is connected to a tube that feeds back into the air intake. So this thing, the EGR valve, I'm going to try my best here, but this is basically a can-shaped fail. This is basically a cylindrical shaped object with like some weird shit going on over here, but let's just say there's a little square end, and this part mounts to the engine, and this part mounts to a copper tube, and this copper tube does something like this is the copper tube, okay? And this copper tube goes up and feeds itself into the air intake. So some of the exhaust gases will come out and back into the air intake. Okay, so the theory of operation is EGR valve stands for exhaust gas recirculation valve. When the car starts and high temperatures are achieved in the combustion chamber and gases develop, what happens is a lot of NOx, or smog, well, NOx develops, and this interacts with air and sunlight to create smog. So the purpose of the EGR valve is to take some of this exhaust and dump it back into the air intake to be mixed in with air again. And the idea being it like reburns the exhaust, because from here to here, this is a colder temperature, this is a hot temperature. So it dumps the hot ass exhaust, that is the NOx that is created by the heat of the reaction and everything, it dumps it back into the air intake, and that dilutes it with normal air and reburns it, and then it exits. So the purpose of this is to minimize smog. I finally got the EGR valve out of the car, along with the shit that I fucked with, and what appears to be some slight carbon buildup. So we'll clean this up real quick. I have also taken a screwdriver and I have cleaned out the carbon buildup. This is what I've got. There's A and there's B. B is supposed to be an O-ring. I've gotten all the carbon out. So I've got A and B. B is supposed to be the O-ring. But this actually looks like just a part of the copper pipe. Confirmed no O-ring. On a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is fun and 10 is I wish I never have to do this ever again for the rest of my life, this is a 10, okay?